Hello everyone, thank you for coming. Welcome to one of the Inconceivable 2020 comics panels, which is called Comic Art Adjacent, Techniques, Skills and Opportunities. This is a panel that will discuss the creation process of comics and the ways in which comic creators can get their work out there and reach people, etc. So I'm the moderator of this panel. My name's Queenie Chan and I'm a manga style comic book artist. My first published work was with the US-based company called Tokyo Pop, and right now I'm working on a series of biographical comics about famous historical queens, called Women Who Are Kings, and next year I'll be working on a PhD at Macquarie Uni about the juncture of comics and video games. So now I'm going to welcome our panel, and thank you everyone for coming and joining us. So I'm going to ask everyone to introduce themselves and tell us a bit about their work. So we'll start with you, Tim.
Oh, great. Hi, I'm Tim McEwen. I'm probably most well known in comics for my work, Greener Pastures, which I do with a writing partner of mine, Michael Michelandos. We were publishing Greener Pastures in the 90s during the black and white comics boom and that kind of era in Australian comics where there was quite a few Australian comics being published or self-published. I'm also an educator. I lecture at tertiary level at a private college. I educate animation and gaming students, mostly in drawing subjects. I also run the Ledger Awards for Excellence in Australian Comics, and probably a million other things, but that's all that comes to mind right now.
Oh, thanks, Tim. Well, Karen?
Hi, I'm Karen. I'm a writer and an editor. When I make comics, it's usually with other people. I'm best known for a couple of anthologies. One is about depression, which is called Kinds of Blue, and one is for children, and that one's called Monsters. It's about monsters and fear. I've also done a full-length science fiction graphic novel with my friend Paul Wong Pan called Eternal Life. And at the moment, I'm not doing comics at all. I'm actually writing a prose novel, which is a sort of YA fantasy sort of series about samurai and magicians and stuff like that.
Thanks, Karen. So, Kieran?
Yeah, hi, I'm Kieran. I have been in the comic book world for about 4 years now, creating my own stories and illustrating. I kicked off my career, I guess you call it, with the Talking Bread 6-part miniseries, and then slowly and surely just been working with other creators from Australia and all over the world, and now dived into my new project called In Purgatory.
Oh, thanks, Kieran. So, Jin, up to you.
Hi, I'm Jin. I'm a comic creator and a game developer. I worked on the webtoon series High School Romance. I also had a manga in the comic anthology magazine called Saturday AM, which was serialized there. And currently, I'm the creative director of a video game called Undying. And I am also one of the letterers for Shonen Jump.
Wow, fantastic. Anyway, thanks everyone for introducing yourselves. I have a list of questions I'd like to go through, so feel free to discuss these questions. So the first question to you is, how do you use comics in your creative output? Do you use any software for your work? And if so, what are they? And if you don't use any, by all means, let me know why and why you choose to do things the old-fashioned way. Tim, we'll start with you.
Okay. Part of my teaching, we actually do a subject called visual storytelling, which is storyboards and comics separately and together, what the differences are, what the similarities are. And one of the things I did only a week or two ago was I grabbed most of my usual drawing materials and to show off to the students. So I'm standing there in front of, mostly, I guess, 18 to 20-year-old students, talking about all this traditional material I use. They're all wanting to use their iPads or their Surface Pros or their Cintiqs. And I'm saying, well, this is what it looks like when I do it. And it's almost 100% traditional. The only bit that I don't do traditionally is the colors. So I work 100% traditionally. So this is a cover for a comic that's being kickstarted right now. So that's on paper, nice thick paper. Bristol board, really, thick paper Bristol. I work with pencil first, and then I ink over the top of that, which is the very traditional way to do it. I use brushes and dip pens should have had all this stuff sitting with me. There you go. Brushes and dip pens. I erase the pencils, which again is kind of old-fashioned. A lot of people draw in blue, so they don't have to erase the pencils. And then the digital stuff kicks in after that, because I have to scan it in. I clean it up in Photoshop, and then if it's a cover like that one is, I'll color it in Photoshop. I've never really taught myself how to color traditionally. And at the time I started having to color, Photoshop was already in existence. So I did it that way. Does that kind of answer most of your questions?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Thanks for letting us know your production process, and I find it interesting that you have a mix of hand-drawn and computer art as well. That's how I used to do my work. I've now moved on to fully digital work, and I find there's advantages and disadvantages to both. I know that not all of you are artists here. Some of you are just writers. For people who do both art and write, do you have any comments you'd like to make or talk about your own process and how it differs to Tim?
I do both art and write. My process is very different in the sense that I'm completely digital now as well. So I use Clip Studio Paint, sometimes Photoshop, because there are some things that one program can't do. And InDesign is when I put the book together, and that's how I also do the lettering for Shonen Jump. I use InDesign. So yeah, that's very different. Everything's all on the page. No erasing pencils. I just turn off that layer. So I was originally did things traditionally. I moved to digital because it just made the process, it just streamlined the process. Scanning and like using an A4 scanner, trying to do A3 images was always a pain in the butt, and you always had that weird seam in the middle. So I decided to kick that out. And with, I don't use a Cintiq, but I use something like a Cintiq, and it sort of mimics using drawing on paper. So, that's how I do my stuff.
Oh, fantastic. So to Tim and Jin, do you think the tactile aspect of drawing by hand is something that you miss a lot, or is it not important? Do you have any comments to make on that?
For me, it's really important. I find that comic creation is an extremely time-consuming activity, and for me personally, it's not like it makes a lot of money for me. So it has to be an enjoyable experience, and if possibly the most enjoyable part is breaking out the brush and starting to do the inking. It's that activity is just such a lovely physical interaction between me and the brush, and the ink hitting the paper, and the line doing exactly what I want it to do, hopefully. And to sit on a page for maybe a day, and then there's 20 pages in an issue or 60 pages in a chapter of a graphic novel or something, the physical activity has to be extremely enjoyable for me. I did a special project yesterday for a friend, and it's just one panel, but it was a large kind of oversized panel. And you can see my drawing boards behind me. And I go through periods in the process where sometimes I'm standing up because I want to be moving in and out of the artwork, and I'm using a really fat, blunt pencil so that I'm not worried about the detail of the image. I'm more worried about the composition and the large shapes, and I'm using like my whole arm and my shoulders while I'm doing that part of the drawing. And then there are hours where I sit hunched over the drawing instead, where I'm doing the finer pencil work or the ink work. That whole kind of flow from roughs to pencils to inks, etc., is a really it is an enjoyable aspect to it, and it kind of breaks it up as well. The fact that if a page takes me a day or 2 days or sometimes longer, at least it's not the same activity for the whole time.
Right, I see. So Kieran and Karen, Kieran and Karen, do you have anything to add to that? I know Karen, you're a writer, so obviously you work with artists. I know Jin also, you're an art director. Like, how would that influence how you do your work? Would you like to comment on that, starting with Karen?
So when I write, I usually use either pen and paper for the rough, the zero draft. And then I tend to work in Scrivener. I use the Scrivener comic template, which was, I think, developed by Anthony Johnston back in the day. And I quite like it because it's very clean and very simple. And quite consistent. Doesn't print so well, so sometimes when I'm sending the scripts to artists, then they will go in and reformat the entire script, which must be annoying for them, but it works well for me. Then because I sometimes will do the lettering on my own comics, I'll usually do that in InDesign. Like I know most people try to do lettering in Illustrator, but I've never learned how to use Illustrator, and it's very different to InDesign, so it kind of freaks me out a little bit. So yeah, I might just never learn. And because I'm also putting the books together in InDesign, I've actually become quite familiar with that program and use it quite a lot for everything. And sometimes there'll be a few like cleanup things in Photoshop, but generally, like by the time stuff gets to me, it's all pretty much been done.
Right. Well, thanks. Anything you want to add, Kieran?
Yeah, look, my process is pretty much traditional still. I'm doing pencils and inking. Again, my technique is the blue pencil. And I'm able to take that into Photoshop and drop out any of the unnecessary background. And then from there, just building it and doing little effects if I need to enhance backgrounds, whatever it may be, via Photoshop and Clip Studio.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I guess traditional, I really do enjoy more so, like getting my hands dirty on the paper and making a mess is more entertaining for me and more enjoyable. And the end result of having it in front of you rather than digitally is a lot more rewarding.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any experience working with other artists in a group? Collaboration is one of the questions I like to talk about.
Yeah, what I've found within Purgatory, I actually have an artist come on and do some, whether it be a past event that's taken place in the story or a side story, and having them come on, and whether it be a writer or an illustrator, they get to kind of put their own touch on it. So that's fun for me to be able to experience that. How
do you deal with that? Because some people, not saying anyone here, some people do have problems with control, I guess, particularly if you're the originator of that work. Is this something that you just work through yourself, or is there any way you can talk to an artist? What are some good ways that you could express yourself that way?
It's funny, I had two writers doing two little projects for me on the same property, and they came back with very similar stories, and it was kind of heartbreaking for me because I had to say, sorry guys, both your stories are the same, but how about you go back and write two different stories for me without having any confrontation there. And they came back and delivered far better stories than they originally delivered in the first place. So that for me was really rewarding. I kind of let them go and do their own thing. Like they know the property. I always give them plenty of research to do before they jump on. And once they've got that research done, it's pretty much playing with my toys. And they come back and deliver every time. So I haven't had an issue with that. That's fun for me to kind of let them go and play off and just make up as they go. I guess make up stories.
Great. Well, thanks for that. Jin, you've worked as an art director for a video game, which is clearly a collaborative project. I don't know how big your game is. If you can enlighten us a little bit and talk about some of the conflicts you might have had in working with your team of artists, writers, programmers, etc., and how you might have dealt with that.
Yeah. So I'm like a one bit further. I'm the creative director, so I actually look over everything, including the art. And
can you tell us a little bit about what kind of video game that you're working on, since I don't think...
Oh, sure. Yeah, so I'm working on a video game called Undying, which is a survival video game which comes out on all the consoles and PC, where you play as a mother in a zombie apocalypse who's just been bitten by a zombie. And you are trying to basically teach your son as much survival skills as you possibly can before you turn. So it's all completely player driven. It's not story based, so it's not going to have like cutscene. It's all, every choice that the player makes matters in the game. And then at one point the mother will turn, and then you have to go, oh, what will happen to your son? So yeah, that's what we're working on. I work at a studio called Vanimals, and we're a team of 10 people. And what I do is I try not to take too much ownership over everything. I wrote the original lore Bible and came up with some original sketches of how the game should end up looking. But because, you know, it's a small team and you want everybody to have input, you try and match everything together. So I'll get different design documents, and I'll get different sketches and different gameplay mechanics. And then I try and thematically fit them together so that it all feels like something. So somebody might come up with an idea, and then I'll go, this is really cool, but unfortunately it goes against this, what we're trying to do. So just a quick example, since our mother is dying and turning into a zombie, her skills actually decline in the game. And at one point, one of the designers wanted to add things to improve her skills. And I'm like, this kind of goes against what we're trying to do. So we looked at it in a different way, and we've applied some of those ideas, but did it differently. But I don't want to spoil it because the game's not out yet.
Right. So I guess you need good conflict resolution skills, willingness to sit down and work things out, and that's just the way it is to work together.
Sometimes there are big arguments, but what ends up happening is that everybody gets the whiteboard and you have 20 minutes to write everything out, make your point, and then we all discuss it together and go, oh, this is good, this is good. And sometimes those ideas merge into something new, which is even better. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, thanks for all that. Karen, you have you're a writer, so you've worked with a number of artists. Was there any kind of situation where you found yourself in a conflict that you felt you needed to resolve, and how did that happen, and what happened in the end?
Yeah, I find that every collaborator is different, obviously, because everybody is different and they all have their own strengths and things, which I think, yeah, I find that every time I work with a new person, then I have to get used to the way that they work. And obviously they have to get used to the way that I work. So it can be very, very different each time. Sometimes it's absolutely seamless, and that always surprises me, particularly if it's with people who I don't know very well. And I always find that really interesting, that the people that you don't know that well, the collaboration can just go really, really smoothly. People you know a bit better, it can be a bit rockier for whatever reason. And so often I find it's about communication and expectations, and the clearer I can be about that, and even about the method of a communication. Like, I've come to discover that some people, they just work better if I talk to them in person or if we talk on the phone. And some people are quite happy to do everything via email or by instant messenger chat or whatever it is. Usually though, because they're my projects and I'm the writer, then I usually have the final say, and that's sort of written into our collaboration agreements. But as much as possible, I will try and give my artists sort of free rein and try to play with their strengths, particularly like when I'm writing for them. There will be particular stories that I have particular artists in mind for. So in Monsters, I did this story, which was basically a map, and the first 4 pages of the comic are just 4 sections of the map. And I knew that my friend Kathleen Jennings, that she would be perfect for it, that she knew exactly what I'd be trying to do with this map, because, you know, she's familiar with all those old maps with the funny illustrations around the edges, and here'd be dragons and all the rest of it. And so, like, when I was talking to her about it, I did see her in person when I kind of pitched her the project and stuff. But I think that was a lot easier because I knew it was her sort of a thing, and I knew that she would kill it, and she did. Whereas there have been other people where, like, I might have had the idea for the story and then gone to find someone to draw it. And then, yeah, it's just a little bit trickier because I much prefer to know who I'm working with up front so that I can write to the strengths, play to the strengths. Because I know if there's someone, for example, like my friend Renee Fitzner in Melbourne, he draws and writes his own comics. He's very, very familiar with the medium. Then I gave him a script which was a lot more sort of Marvel method, where it just says, page 1, this is what's happened, here's the dialogue kind of thing. And he's the one who sort of works it out, what panel goes where, etc., and lays it out. Whereas with people who I haven't worked with that closely, who haven't had as much experience in comics, then I'll be a bit more full script, page 1, panel 1, these are the types of shots I'm looking at, that kind of thing. And so, yeah, working it out when there has been conflict, yeah, it is more about trying to see where they're coming from and why they've chosen to make that particular decision. Seeing if that works well with the story that we're trying to tell together. And if it doesn't, maybe working out some kind of compromise, or, you know, on the very, very odd occasion, it's me having to say, actually, no, can we not do it like this? Can we do it like this?
I see. Fantastic. So Tim, you sound like you do most of your work on your own. Like, I'm sure you've collaborated with other people in your very long career. Is there any comments you'd like to make about your own experiences and the pros and cons of working alone, I guess?
Yeah, so the Greener Pastures comics, I actually work with Michael. He's the writer.
Okay.
And the although the initial concept was really mine, I find Michael is really great at taking an idea like that and running with it, which is, you know, what Greener Pastures is all about. And it's funny listening to you, Karen, because Michael, it almost doesn't matter what project we're on, what new project, because we've done a lot of short Greener Pastures stories as well as the really long one that we're working on now. And we used to do like 20 or 30-page issues as well back in the day. But his scripts normally start with page 1, panel 1, and he tells me what's happening, and then panel 2, what's happening, etc., etc. And by the time he's like halfway through page 2, he forgets about that and just starts telling me the story. It's not really prose, but he's just typing out the story for me. And that's definitely the way that I like to work. Michael is not so good with the visualization. He's really good at the characters and the dialogue, but not with the visualization and the pacing, etc. So unless he's got a really specific thing visually that he thinks is important to the telling of the story, he just tells the story to me and then leaves it to me to decide the page count and the what panels will be big and what panels will be small, etc. And then just to bring up a collaboration that I did recently for the Australia Burns anthology earlier this year. That was like the first time that we had an opportunity to do a Greener Pastures comic in color for quite a while, and a short story for, you know, the first time we did a short story in a little while as well. So I asked my son to ink it because he draws comics as well. He's a cartoonist, and a lot of his cartooning and art practice is comics. So I asked him if he wanted to pencil it or ink it, and he said, well, which one do you think is going to be easier? And I said, I think the inking will probably be easier. I really wanted to ink his work. I really was looking forward to that. So next time we work together, he'll ink it. And then the coloring was done by my daughter, who's currently studying fine art at the National Art School. And that really freaked her out. She wasn't really ready for that. She didn't really know what that meant. And I sent it to a couple of websites to talk about color in general and color for comics. And, you know, I knew that she had it in her anyway. So Michael wrote, I penciled, Samuel inked, and Annabelle colored, and that was a really amazing experience to see those bits and pieces come back. It's not often that somebody else inks my work, and I really enjoy it when I get to see it. It's an interpretation. So yeah.
Wow, fantastic. A good collaborator is always hard to find. When you find someone that you're able to collaborate with over many years, it's incredibly valuable. But Tim, you're very unique in that you're able to have family members who are all very artistic, who clearly take after you. Anyone else have stories like that, or is there everyone mostly not very artistic in their family member department?
Well, my 10-year-old daughter has started drawing comics, and it's completely, I don't know, sort of independent, but I also kind of nudged her that way because I kept putting comics into her hands. And so last year I collected together a whole bunch of stories that she wrote based on a character that she drew from my anthology Monsters. She drew a monster which was a lot like a monster that I drew, but then she's made it her own. She called it Mr. Monster, and she drew a whole series of short stories about Mr. Monster, and then all of a sudden Mr. Monster's friends. Anyway, cool. I self-published that as a I think it was about 66 pages as just a vanity thing to give away for Christmas presents. Really good idea. Christmas presents for family, teachers, friends, that sort of thing. And this year we're working on volume 2. So I started getting her to scan them in, and I'll start and even, number the files correctly so they're in the right order, number the stories. And it's about 100 pages this year, which is quite incredible. And
sounds
now I'm trying to get her to do the cover. And I said to her, the cover's got to be in color, and she's fighting me on that. So it's an interesting collaboration. I'm not sure how it works with you, Tim, and your family members, but yes, she's definitely fighting me on it.
Okay, well, thanks for all those fantastic replies and all the discussions and interesting stories we've just had. So the next set of questions I'm going to ask will be about publishing your work, whether it's in print or in whatever format you do, and how do you get your work out there. So we'll start with you, Jin. How do you get your work out there and find an audience? Do you do webcomics, traditional publishing, self-publishing, conventions, etc.? Tell us what you do.
I think you have to do, well, from my experience, you have to do everything.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you do it if you have digital files of your comics, I reckon I put mine on Tapas, I put it on Webtoon, I put it on its own website. I print them. When I've recently been living in China, so
Oh.
I haven't gone to many cons, but when I'm in Australia, I go to cons and I have my physical books. So yeah, you do everything because you know it's hard to get an audience, and you have to try and get it from everywhere you can. So you know, it's sort of like going for a job interview. If you really want a job, you don't just go to one and go, oh, I hope I get that one, and then wait for the result. You do as many as you can, and then you choose. And then luckily with comics, you know, unless you have a exclusive deal with somewhere, you can have it everywhere, and then you can get the audience from there, and it all adds up in the end. So yeah, but I think for me, the one that I've been most successful on is Webtoon. I got quite a large audience on Webtoon with High School Romance, averaging at like nearly 1 million clicks a chapter. And then that was a good one for me because I also got some payment from Webtoon because my series was so popular. So that was really helpful to me. But because it did well there, I was still posting it on Tapas, even though Tapas, the audience was way lower. But you just get it out there anyway. So get it everywhere. That's what I think.
Yeah, fantastic. So what about you, Karen?
For me,
yeah.
my first dip was in Kickstarter. I threw the first issue of Talking Bread into Kickstarter, and they always tell you when you do your first one that it's mostly friends and family that back them, which is true. But the audience that do come to it, they tend to pick up what you're doing and follow along on other social media platforms. And from there to now, it's been a snowball effect. It's slowly and surely continuously building. And it's about brand loyalty, and it's also about readership. Like, people enjoy your stories, they'll continuously come back, which has been important. But with Kickstarter also, I've been able to build up a really good base for EDMs. So emailing every month to my followers and readers, whoever they may be, and just letting them know what's going on. You know, I might be working on a new project with another collaborator, letting them know about that. And then after that comes the conventions. So hitting the road and driving around for hours on end, going and meeting people face to face, having a conversation about your work. That's been just as important. And it's been a really big effort to be able to go out and talk to people about it, and kind of they come back year after year, and you know, they might have enjoyed it, they might have not. You get feedback that way, and it kind of creates that relationship with a face-on-face level. And then social media. I mean, we live in the world of the World Wide Web, and you've got Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and all that stuff. So that's been a huge help in getting my stuff out there as well. There's so many different ways to do it. And I think that, you know, probably going back 20 to 30 years ago, it was a lot harder for people coming through the ranks, whether it was conventions or whatever it may be. But now with social media, Kickstarter, Indiegogo, crowdfunding, all that, it just makes it so much easier to get your stuff out there.
Fantastic. Karen, how do you get your work out there?
Well, I'm self-published, and like Kieran, I've run a couple of Kickstarter campaigns mostly for my anthologies. So yeah, it was through sort of word of mouth and things. So the first one I ran for Kinds of Blue, that one sort of exploded a little bit, partly through social media. And I think also at the time, because it's about depression, it really sort of touched a nerve. And so I was really fortunate in that people like Scott McLeod retweeted it, and a couple of other bigger name comic creators just on Twitter. In terms of building an audience, I feel like I fail on every level at this. What I do is, well, I used to do conventions when there were conventions. It's actually quite funny that this year I decided to take a break from conventions, and then of course the whole world shut down. I also run workshops where I can. So there's a library festival that used to run in July called Comic Conversation, and I had the privilege of going around and running a couple of workshops about writing and occasionally about comics, and that's how people would get to know me Also, I'm an ambassador for an organization called Books in Homes Australia, who partner with schools to get books into the hands of underprivileged kids. And so I've been able to go to a couple of schools to participate in what they call their book giving assemblies. So on the one hand, part of it involves actually physically giving out these lovely book bags to the kids who've chosen the books from the Scholastic catalogue. But on the other hand as well, I also get to present a little bit about comics, and it's really, really quite fun because you see the readership in kids reading comics at that age growing and growing. So when my eldest daughter was in kindergarten, there weren't that many kids reading comics at all, but now everybody is reading Dogman and Rainer Telgemeier and so on and so forth. So the last one that I did was this was actually via Zoom, for a school in Adelaide, and the whole school was watching, which was really cool. What wasn't cool was I couldn't see them, but they could see me. And I did a little presentation about comics and what kinds of comics they might be reading, the language of comics, about panels and about, sound effects and thought bubbles and so on and so forth. And then I would talk them through the process of making a comic, and I read them one of my comics as well. And usually when I do these school visits, then I'll donate a couple of my books to the library, and so that the kids have something to read. Sometimes when I've gone and done a school visit, then I've actually been able to get the kids to, get material in the hands of parents and saying, if you'd like to pre-order the book, I will bring it with me. But yeah, in general, I'm very bad at, I guess, continuing to build my audience. I had a newsletter and it's sort of fallen by the wayside with everything that I do. I do maintain a Twitter presence. I know people say Twitter is a bit of a dumpster fire of a social media platform, but I actually really love it. And there's a lot of comics people on Twitter. So I try and keep that up. But with other social media or other newsletter type stuff, I'm a bit hopeless.
Mm-hmm. Oh, great. Thanks for that. What about you, Tim? How do you get your work out there? You do a lot of stuff, so by all means, let us know.
I feel like I'm the least qualified to talk about this because when we were doing Greener Pastures before, it was a completely different world. There was basically no internet, and we actually were printing 10 to 12,000 copies of Greener Pastures because it was going through newsagent distribution and diamond distribution through to get to comic shops, etc.
Was in these 80s, would you say?
90s, yeah, it was the mid to late 90s, and it's totally irrelevant now. So I'm currently drawing the Greener Pastures graphic novel, which takes the characters to the present rather than the 90s when we were first doing it. And I've decided to serialize that in an anthology that's being published by Cyclone Comics, which is run by Gary Challoner. And the Kickstarter for that is running as we're recording now. And it's the first time I've really been involved with a Kickstarter in that degree. And even that is not too much of a degree. Gary's running all of that. So, but I try to keep a bit of a profile on social media. I do drawings and sketches, and I try to put them on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, to try to just keep a profile. I had a bit of success with an Inktober a couple of years ago, where I was inking some of my favorite artists' pencils and putting a time lapse as well as the final work on all of those platforms then as well. And that the idea for that was mainly to teach me about other people's work processes. Inking someone like Jeff Smith or Barry Windsor Smith or someone like that teaches you a lot about very different art styles. But the other thing was I was hoping to actually up my profile on social media by using the right hashtags and just trying to get it out there on a daily basis to see if I got anything out of that. And it actually seemed to work. I got a lot of extra followers that I didn't know. There weren't people I knew. They weren't even Australians. So that was something that worked for me once. But generally, I think the other people here are much more interesting to listen to under this subject for now.
Oh no, I think your experience is very valuable. We're talking about how times change, because as we sit right now, times are still changing as well. And some of the things that would work to promote yourself on early social media or maybe back in the 90s and all that no longer work in 2020. I mean, I'm sure Kieran and Jin, you both seem to have a lot of online experience in running Kickstarter campaigns and doing webcomics, but I imagine that you would have noticed audiences changing as well, and the need for you to keep up with them and to keep them entertained and occupied. You know, so what are some of the situations you have run into where you felt that you needed to change your approach to continue getting the, what can only be described as a 24-hour PR cycle?
Yeah. I mean, living in a pandemic world has changed the medium all round. For me this year, especially, because there's no conventions, because you're not getting your work out more regularly as what you would have been, crowdfunding has been that, I guess they've picked up the slack of that, which has meant that I've had to push more work out, which is not a bad thing. It's been a really good learning curve for me to be able to find my audience more so and deliver to them as best that I can. On the sense of social media as well, it's been, people enjoy free content. And I guess with Instagram especially, the more you're giving them a behind the scenes look of, whether it be some fan art, whether it be a comic book, whether it be something else you're working on, they love it. So I think it's staying relevant in this COVID world. And that's been really important for me this year, to extend that reach beyond what it would have been for conventions and meet and greets. And I have to say as well, comic book stores as well, like comic book stores stock my comics, which is important. That they are the lifeblood of comic books. We need them. So it's important to have them stocking as well and getting it into their stores, because they're still relevant during all this online orders, whatever it may be. So yeah.
Right, fantastic.
Should
Jin?
also put in a note for libraries as well, since
Oh yes, I should as well. Yeah, I by the way, about the libraries thing, I do run a website called Oz Comics Database that is for libraries, and lists a lot of Australian comics that libraries can buy, and it lists directions for how you can list your work with library suppliers so they can be made available for libraries. And so that's being run in conjunction with Alia Graphic Group. So that's run by librarian Yerji Rutia. So sorry if I butchered your name, Yerji. Yeah, he is trying to get more Australian comics into local libraries. So that is always a market that you can consider as well. And so just go to ozcomicsdb.com if you're interested in learning more about that. So that's my plug over. But thanks, Karen, for mentioning libraries as well. And schools as well, because that is attached to libraries. I think there is an educational kind of interest from state governments to push more comics and visual education into schools. And so that's also a thing you can consider. But of course, with education, things can be, you know, pretty strict. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. Yeah. So Jin, would you like to tell us a little bit more about some of the challenges you've had coming in with dealing with your webcomics and webtoons, and what working on webtoons is like?
Yeah, so the interesting thing about that I've learned about being on Webtoon, and then that my series High School Romance getting so popular, is that people love the property, not necessarily the creator. Which is,
that's so painful.
Yeah, so once I finished High School Romance, I completed the story, it had an ending. When I said, okay, this is my next project, that audience did not automatically move over.
Wow.
And so I basically had to start from scratch again when I was doing my next series, Zero King of Thieves. So, you know, that's something that hits you. Like you think, oh man, I have all this momentum going, and I'm just going to keep going. So once I finish one webtoon, here's my next one. It just didn't translate at all. Like I would have thought that people would get to that last page and go check out my new series and then click on it immediately, but it just didn't work like that. So, and I think, you know, thinking 2020 hindsight, it sort of makes sense, right? Like when you think of Marvel characters, nobody ever thinks about who created them for the most part. You just love that hero. And so even when writers and artists change on that comic, if you are a fan of that character, you will keep following that character regardless of who's writing it or drawing it. And so, yeah, when that, as an independent creator, when that hits you, like you're like, oh man. And so like, it's funny because like you have this creative vision, you want to keep things, you know, you want to do what you want to do. But there was a big chance, there was a big, like a small time there where I was like, should I just do a sequel to High School Romance? Because then I would just have that audience come back again and then I can keep going. But then I think creatively that wasn't fulfilling. So even though I had to take a hit there, it was, you know, it was painful. It was painful.
Yeah. I think we've all had experiences like that. We've all had situations where you do something that you think is kind of average and then you put it out there and a whole bunch of people love it for whatever reason. And they're like, look at my other stuff, which is actually better. And then nobody's interested. So I think we've all been through that process, and just the nature of being an indie creator and the whole artistic fulfillment issue that is so important to just the process of creation. Yeah, well, thanks so much for sharing that story. I actually have a question from another person in the panel that's talking about what life might be like for the comics industry in other countries. Because Jin, you mentioned earlier that you lived in China for a little while. Did you try and get into the comics industry there? And can you talk about what it's like over there and how it's different to Australia?
Yeah, I did. So I only recently moved back. I moved back this year due to pandemic. I definitely did try go over there. So High School Romance was a thing I translated it into Chinese, and they have their own versions of, say, Webtoon. So it's called Yu Yao Chi, what U17. And so it's funny, when I first moved there about 5 years ago now, the industry actually completely shifted. So before, they were sort of doing the Japanese Shonen Jump style. So you would, you know, go to editorial and then you'd submit your comic, and then you'd get into like those anthology magazines like Shonen Jump. So they would do all that. But then they found out like less and less people were buying physical copies, and it was all digital. And so it all became apps, and all those companies that were doing anthology magazines then got rid of their anthology magazine and replaced it with an app. And they just did exactly the same as Webtoon, where people can submit their own comics and stuff like that. And then once comics get popular enough, then they'll feature it and then give them a salary. I did 3 conventions. I went to one in Guangzhou. I did Beijing Comic Con, which was done by Reed Pop. And I did another smaller one in a city I was living in at the time. And it's sort of that people there aren't that interested in indie properties. It's one of those, it's a very hard sell. It's either they looked at my table and they go, I don't recognize any of this, and then moved on. And so it was a tough crowd. It was a very tough crowd. And so I really struggled there. But I do, you know, I try and translate all my stuff into Chinese and put it out there anyway, because the audience is just massive. If you get that one hit, then you're set. So, you know, something I keep trying, but your audience, you know, from one country doesn't necessarily translate to another country.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, well, thanks for that. Interesting insight into the Chinese comics market. Obviously, the population over there is like 10 billion times bigger than it is in Australia. But I guess Australia, you are more liable to get people who are interested in Australian and locally created works, as opposed to in China, where there's so much of it that people are just like, whatever. Yeah, it's a really unfortunate thing that we just don't have any conventions this year. I think a lot of people miss the physical aspect of it and the ability to be able to talk to other creators and compare and contrast notes and see what everyone's up to. There are some people I only see on the convention circuit, and it's a pity that I'm not able to see them in the flesh this year. So hopefully things will get back to normal next year. So my next question is, while we're on the subject of creating comics and putting your work out there, what are some things that you think you're really good at comics, and which areas that you think you're not so good at and could help in improving? So Tim, we'll start with you.
That's a good question. You know, one of the things I did recently, there's a Facebook group that's doing a jam comic based on the pandemic, and it's a page each. Somebody does a page and then nominates someone to do the next page, and they just carry on the story from there. Jam comics can be a mixed bag. Sometimes you get a flow of story, which is interesting. Sometimes they get very kind of broken up and it doesn't seem like an ongoing story. But it was a really fun little thing to be involved with. So I did a page for that, kind of challenged myself to see if I could do it in a day, because I don't really have time to do work that's you know, not really going to go anywhere. And I think I did it like in about a page a day and a half, including the coloring, and the coloring always takes me forever. So I was very surprised that I was able to do that. But like a couple of weeks later, I put on Facebook and Instagram the process. So I do a scan of each step of the process, just in case I spill tea on my artwork or something. That's one of the problems with working traditionally. If you spill tea on it, it's done for. So I take a scan every step in case something goes wrong. So with that, I can actually, you know, present to people, this is what each step looks like. And everyone's, you know, is commenting on the steps. And then somebody said that I had no idea that you'd lettered it by hand. Even for traditional artists, a lot of them will just go, yeah, except for the lettering, I won't letter by hand. And I find that's a really important aspect of the storytelling. I feel that just like the emotional context of the character and the artist comes out in the line work, I think if you're lettering by hand, the emotional context of the dialogue will come out, you know, even if it's imperceptible or nearly imperceptible. So I like to letter by hand, but I feel like I'm terrible at it. I feel like my real handwriting is just atrocious, almost indecipherable. So my lettering is not real. I don't feel like it's really good, but people were saying that they thought it was amazing. So maybe I can't see that it's actually not as bad as I thought it was. But just the fact that I was doing it by hand was also just blowing people away. I had no idea that this was hand lettered, but it's an important, even the shape of the balloons and the fact that it looks like it's hand drawn is important to me. And if you want one other like little secret thing that I try not to keep secret, actually, because I try to look after my comic making brothers and sisters. This is the brush I use, right? And that's a Chinese calligraphy brush. And a friend of mine who was a calligrapher, because I was talking about inking, and I used to use, and I've still got like some sable hair, Winsor & Newton, like 000s, really fine. And the hair is like that long on it, and you dip and you do 2.5 lines and you have to dip again. Well, this brush, once it's fully charged, those white hairs just soak up ink and then hold the ink. And once it's fully charged, I can ink for like 20 or 30 minutes sometimes without having to dip again. And it looks like it's really big. It's enormous compared to a Winsor & Newton 00 or something like that. But I will get the finest lines I want, and I will get the thickest lines I want out of the same brush once you get used to how to use it. So that's my secret weapon. And it's the thing that actually makes the inking process 10 times more enjoyable. It's just so beautiful to work with. It's got a nice spring back. Obviously they wear out eventually and you have to buy a new one. And I usually buy them, buy a few at a time. That's a medium size. You can buy larger and smaller. So that's my secret weapon for.
Right. Well, thanks very much, Tim, for sharing that. So Karen, we'll do with you next. What do you think you're good at comics? What do you think you're good at in comics, and what areas do you think you can improve?
I think I am quite good at coming up with stories and characters for short comics. When it comes to improving things, I'd really love to have a crack at something longer than what I've done. Like Eternal Life was, oh gosh, maybe 76 pages or something, but it'd be really interesting to see, like a Vertigo length type series. I don't know. Also, because I'm a writer, I do struggle a bit to think visually, and so I'd love to be able to improve on that side. That's where I appreciate artists for helping me see comics better or try new things. And when I was working on Monsters, I was trying that a little bit, hence one comic being about maps and things. But I think it would be really fun to have those boundaries pushed a bit more and to be forced to try and think more visually and maybe do comics that are like with diagrams or, have no words or something like that. Yeah.
Hi. Fantastic, thanks. Kieran, things you're good at, things that you could improve in comics.
Improve it at all. I need improvement on everything. But I think it's just about continually trying and keep putting in 100% each time we do it. I've definitely grown since my first comic. Hopefully I have. But I think now going further into variant series that I'm doing, conceptualizing the characters and getting their backstories. I'm finding that process to becoming it's a lot more enjoyable to work out where they've come from before writing the script. So those little elements that I'm starting to do more so really do help the creative process, whether it be illustrating or writing the story itself. And yeah, like every year I try to do an online course, whether it be for writing or illustrating, just to keep the wheel turning, keep developing as I go. I don't want to slow down. I want to progress. I want to go forward. So that's probably the best advice I give to anyone out there and myself continuously.
All right. Well, thank you. Jin?
I think for me, the thing that I'm most happy with my comics is pacing. I'm a big nerd for pacing in comics. You know, the flow just has to be there, just has to feel natural. The page turn has to be great. You know, when to use long vertical panels, when to use the wide ones, when to use a double page spread. That stuff I nerd over all the time. And when I think I'm a big fan of Dragon Ball, and if you've never read the manga of Dragon Ball, read it in pacing. It is absolutely incredible. So, you know, and I try to apply that to what I'm doing. And so, yeah, that's what I'm most happy with. Where I think I can work on the most is consistency in creating. So what I tend to do is that, like, once I finish a chapter, I say, okay, I'm going to take 1 week off, 1 week break on this comic, and I'll come back to it the next week. That week ends up turning into a month, sometimes 2 months. Once it can't happen, it changed to a year. And, you know, I have to keep forcing myself. You have to just keep doing it. And the longer that break goes, the harder it is to get back, because you know how much work needs to be done. So for me, I would love to work with like an editor or somebody who would just go like, this needs to be done tomorrow, and I do it. So I think that's
prod method, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think working with Shonen Jump has been really good for me that way. Like the issue comes out and I literally have 24 hours to get it done. And it comes out on the same day. And so there's, you know, this nice rhythm that I'm always doing it. So starting at Shonen Jump has really pushed me to start working on something again. So there will be something new coming from me before the end of the year. So yeah.
Okay, fantastic. I think we have about 1 minute left. So I'm going to throw out a very quick question and just ask you to just reply, give a one-word reply. When it comes to writing comics, are you a plotter or are you a pantser? By that, I mean, do you like to plot or do you just fly by the seat of your pants and just making things up?
I'm a pantser, but I think I want to plot, but I am a pantser.
Okay, Kieran?
I was a pantser, now I'm a plotter.
Oh, okay. What about you, Karen?
Definitely plotter.
Plotter. Tim?
Yeah, I don't think I have enough experience to really say. Probably a plotter.
Okay, it sounds like everyone fantasizes about being a plotter, whether they are or not. Okay, well, congratulations, thank you. Thank you so much for participating in this panel. Yeah, I think we have a very wide range of experiences that's been shared today. So thank you all for coming. And if you've listened to this far, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Yeah, thanks.